She brought another man to our private anniversary dinner. I didn't yell. I ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, paid the entire $3,000 bill, and disappeared out the back door. Folks, Uncle Mickle here. And I'm not telling you this story because I'm proud of how it ended. I'm telling you because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't screaming. It's silence. Sometimes the strongest move isn't fighting. It's walking away so clean they feel the absence before they understand the loss. That night changed everything. Not just my marriage. Not just my bank account. My identity. My understanding of loyalty. My belief in what forever meant. It was a Thursday evening in early October. Cool air. Just enough bite to remind you summer was done. We had reservations at a private dining room in a high-end steakhouse downtown. The kind of place where the host knows your name and the waiters glide instead of walk. 15 years of marriage. 15. You don't get there by accident. Or at least, I thought you didn't. I had planned it carefully. I always did. That's who I was in our relationship. Steady, organized, dependable. The man who made sure bills were paid, anniversaries were remembered, and the car never ran on empty. I believed love showed itself in responsibility, in showing up, in quiet consistency. Her name was Sarah, and for most of those 15 years, I would have told you she was my best friend. We weren't flashy. No dramatic fights. No social media couple goals. Just a house in the suburbs, a dog that shed too much, Sunday morning pancakes, and a shared understanding that we were building something solid, something long-term. That's what I thought anyway. When I booked that private room, I imagined we'd sit across from each other, maybe laugh about how young and broke we used to be. Maybe she'd reach for my hand the way she used to when we first started dating. Maybe we'd talk about the future, vacations, retirement, the next chapter. I arrived early. I always arrive early. Ordered sparkling water. Check my watch. Sent her a text. Take your time. I'm here. She replied, be there soon. That heart emoji. Funny how something so small can mean so little once you see the full picture. 10 minutes later, the door to the private dining room opened. She walked in first, and behind her was a man I'd never seen before. Not a co-worker I recognized. Not a cousin. Not anyone introduced in advance. Just a tall guy in a tailored blazer, smiling like he belonged there. She said, Mickle, this is David. I thought it'd be nice if he joined us. Nice. Nice. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat. Slow. Heavy. Not racing. Just deliberate. Like my body already understood something my brain was still trying to process. And right there, folks, in that moment, before a single argument, before a single raised voice, I realized something was deeply, permanently broken. But I didn't show it. I smiled, and I pulled out a chair. Because sometimes the most dangerous move isn't reacting. It's waiting. That was the beginning of the longest night of my life. And if you think bringing another man to your anniversary dinner is the worst part of this story, you haven't heard what happened next. Before that Saturday night, my life was ordinary in the best possible way. Jennifer and I had built something steady. Not perfect, no marriages, but solid. We met in our late 20s at a friend's barbecue. She laughed at one of my terrible jokes, and I remember thinking she had the kind of smile that made a room feel warmer. Back then, I was still figuring myself out. She was ambitious, sharp, always planning her next career move. I admired that about her. We married 3 years later in a small church just outside town. Nothing extravagant. Close family. A rented tux. A modest honeymoon in Colorado. We promised each other stability, partnership, honesty. The kind of vows that don't trend online, but matter when the lights are off and life gets real. For the first decade, we moved in sync. Bought a modest house in a quiet subdivision. White fence. Maple tree in the front yard. I handled finances. She handled most of the social calendar. We had routines, and routines can be beautiful. Sunday morning coffee on the porch. Grocery shopping together every Saturday. Watching the same detective shows, and pretending to solve the cases before the reveal. There's comfort in predictability. I worked long hours in operations management. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and allowed us to travel once or twice a year. Jennifer climbed the ladder in marketing, changing companies twice to chase better opportunities. I supported her every time. When she wanted to take night classes to sharpen her skills, I cooked dinner and made sure the house stayed quiet. I believed in being the foundation, and for a long time, she seemed grateful for that. But about a year before that dinner, something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, just subtly. She started guarding her phone more, smiling at messages she didn't explain, taking more work events in the evenings. At first, I brushed it off. Careers evolve. Responsibilities grow. People get busy. She also became more distant physically. Not cold, just distracted. Like her mind was somewhere else even when she sat beside me. Conversations shortened. Eye contact faded quicker. Still, I convinced myself it was stress. We all go through seasons. There was one night, maybe 4 months before the anniversary, when I woke up around 2 a.m. and found her sitting in the living room, scrolling on her phone. The light hit her face in that blue glow. I asked if everything was okay. She said, "Just can't sleep." I nodded and went back to bed. I didn't press. Looking back now, that's the moment I first felt something tug in my chest. A quiet warning. Not proof. Just instinct. But here's the thing about instincts, folks. Sometimes we silence them because the alternative is too painful to consider. Now, let me ask you something before I go further. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was off, but you ignored it because you didn't want to believe it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone in this, because that's what I did. I ignored it. Instead of confronting her, I doubled down on being the reliable husband, planned more date nights, suggested weekend trips, bought her flowers on random Tuesdays. I thought maybe I just needed to remind her of us. But reminders don't fix what's already unraveling. A few weeks before our anniversary, she mentioned a new colleague named David, said he was helping her with a major campaign at work. She spoke highly of him, sharp, creative, funny. I didn't think much of it at the time. We both had co-workers. Still, the way she said his name lingered. It wasn't flirtatious. It was energized. And when I asked if I'd meet him at the company holiday party, she quickly said, "Oh, he probably won't come." Too quick, too rehearsed. But I let it go. Because 15 years of trust isn't easy to question. Because admitting doubt feels like accusing someone you love. Because sometimes we protect the illusion of stability more than we protect ourselves. So when that Saturday night came, I thought I was walking into a celebration of everything we'd built. I had no idea I was walking into a test of my self-respect. And that private dining room was about to expose truths I wasn't ready to see. When Jennifer introduced him, "Mickle, this is David," I stood up and shook his hand. Firm grip, confident smile. The kind of man who was comfortable in his own skin. He looked me in the eye just a second too long. Not aggressive. Not apologetic either. Just aware. Aware of something. I gestured for them to sit. Jennifer took the chair beside him instead of across from me. Small detail. But details matter. The private room suddenly felt smaller. I told myself, stay calm. The waiter came in with menus. I ordered a bottle of sparkling water for the table. David thanked me like I was hosting a business dinner. Jennifer was animated, almost glowing. She filled the silence before it could settle. "I just thought it would be nice," she said, smoothing her napkin on her lap. "David's been such a big part of my year. He understands the campaign stress I've been under." Our anniversary. And she was talking about campaign stress. I nodded. Of course. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Just awareness. Like a puzzle piece snapping into place that I'd been avoiding. They had inside jokes. Subtle glances. Little shared smiles that didn't include me. When David told a story about a late night at the office, Jennifer laughed in a way I hadn't heard in months. Not polite. Not tired. Alive. I asked him how long he'd been with the company. "About 8 months," he said. 8 months. I did the math in my head. That lined up almost perfectly with when the late night started, when the phone turned face down, when the distance grew. Coincidence? Maybe. But I don't believe in that many coincidences lining up in a row. Dinner orders were placed. Filet mignon for Jennifer. Ribeye for David. I ordered the same. I wanted to observe, not participate. They talked across the table about office politics, creative strategies, travel for work. I listened, watched. Jennifer barely looked at me unless I spoke first. At one point, David said, "You're lucky, man. She's incredible to work with." Lucky. That word echoed. I smiled. Yeah, I know. But did I? The wine list sat in front of me. Thick, leather-bound, expensive. I flipped through it slowly, not because I cared about the wine, but because I needed a second to breathe. Something wasn't right, and it wasn't just professional admiration. It was familiarity, comfort, an intimacy disguised as teamwork. I noticed how her knee angled toward him under the table, how she leaned in when he spoke, how he placed his hand briefly on the small of her back when she stood to excuse herself. Small touches, small tells. My chest tightened, but my face stayed neutral. Folks, pause for a second. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted her right then? Or would you have waited and watched? Drop your answer below. I'm curious what you would have chosen, because in that moment I made a decision. Not to react. Not yet. I needed confirmation. I needed clarity. I needed to be absolutely certain before I tore 15 years apart with accusations I couldn't take back. So I waited. Dessert menus arrived. Jennifer suggested we all share something. She said it casually, but it landed heavy. Share. On our anniversary. David checked his phone once and quickly flipped it face down when he saw me notice. Reflexive. Defensive. And then came the moment that sealed it. Jennifer excused herself to take a quick call. David stood too. "I'll stretch my legs," he said. They walked out together. Not separately. Together. Through the glass panel of the private room door, I saw them stop in the hallway. Close. Too close. Heads tilted toward each other in a way that wasn't professional. That's when the calm inside me turned cold. Not explosive. Cold. Because the truth was no longer a suspicion. It was forming right in front of me, and I realized this wasn't an awkward social misstep. This was deliberate, and the night wasn't going to end the way Jennifer expected. When they stepped into the hallway together, I didn't follow immediately. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds, just long enough to steady my breathing, long enough to let the denial drain out of me. Then I stood up. I didn't rush, didn't slam the door open. I walked out quietly, like a man going to wash his hands. The hallway outside the private room curved slightly toward the restrooms. Soft lighting. Carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps. They were standing near the corner. Not arguing. Not discussing work. Whispering. Jennifer's hand was on his chest. Not casually. Resting there. His fingers were brushing her waist. And then she leaned in. Not enough for a full kiss, but enough to make it clear they had done it before. Intimacy doesn't lie. You can tell when something is practiced. I didn't interrupt. I didn't clear my throat. I just watched for 2 seconds longer than I should have. And in those 2 seconds, 15 years collapsed into a single, undeniable truth. This wasn't emotional confusion. This wasn't a harmless crush. This was an affair. I stepped back before they noticed me and returned to the private room. Sat down. Picked up the wine list again. My hands were steady, but my pulse felt distant. Like it belonged to someone else. Have you ever had that moment where the world doesn't explode, it just goes quiet? That's what it felt like. The waiter came in to check on us. I looked up at him and said, "Bring me your most expensive bottle, the one you recommend for a celebration." He hesitated. "Sir, that's a $2,200 bottle." "I know. I need you to understand something here. This wasn't just betrayal. This was my whole life crumbling. Have you ever been blindsided like this? Someone you trusted completely, just destroying everything? Share your story below if you've been there. Let's remind each other we're not crazy for loving deeply." They returned a minute later. Jennifer looked slightly flushed. David adjusted his blazer like he'd just composed himself. They sat down as if nothing had happened. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The distance that had been growing for months. The spark that wasn't mine anymore. The subtle impatience she'd been carrying when I talked about mundane things like mortgage payments or weekend plans. She thought she was already halfway out the door. What she didn't know was that I was about to hold it open for her. The wine arrived. The waiter presented it like it was sacred. I nodded for him to pour. Jennifer's eyebrows lifted slightly when she heard the price whispered. "That's expensive," she said carefully. It's a special night, I replied. David gave a tight smile. We toasted. 15 years. I watched them sip, watched her relax again, assuming the worst had passed. Dinner plates were cleared. Dessert came and went. The bill was placed discreetly in front of me. I didn't even blink when I opened it. $3,000 and change. 15 years condensed into a receipt. I placed my card inside. While the waiter processed it, Jennifer leaned toward David and said softly, "See, I told you he'd handle it." Handle it. That sentence hit harder than the image in the hallway. She had discussed me with him, planned around me, assumed my role. Not husband, provider. I felt something inside me break cleanly. Not shattered, not chaotic. Just snapped. The waiter returned with the receipt. I signed it without hesitation, added a generous tip. Then I stood. "I'm going to grab some air," I said calmly. Jennifer barely looked up. "Okay." David nodded like we were equals. I walked out of that private room, but I didn't stop at the front entrance. I walked straight through the kitchen corridor, nodded at a confused staff member, pushed open the back exit door, and stepped into the cold March night. And as the door closed behind me, I made the quietest, most permanent decision of my life. I wasn't going back. Not to that table. Not to that house. Not to that version of myself. And by the time Jennifer realized I was gone, everything she depended on was about to disappear too. The cold air hit my face the second that back door closed behind me. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just the hum of a city night and the faint clatter of dishes behind a brick wall. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, breathing slow. And something strange happened. The pain didn't explode. It organized itself. You ever notice that? When something hurts so deeply it doesn't feel chaotic, it feels precise. Focused. Like a surgeon's blade instead of a bar fight. I walked to my car without rushing. Sat behind the wheel. Didn't start it yet. Just stared at the steering wheel while the reality settled in. 15 years. Gone. But here's the part that surprised me. I wasn't thinking about David. I wasn't even thinking about the image in the hallway. I was thinking about respect. About how she said, "I told you he'd handle it." Not my husband. Not Mickle. Just a function. A wallet with a pulse. And that's when I understood something important. This wasn't a momentary mistake. This was erosion. Months, maybe longer, of slowly redefining me in her mind. So I pulled out my phone. First call, the bank. I didn't yell at the representative. I didn't explain the story. I simply said, "I need to freeze the joint accounts and cancel the authorized user on my primary credit card effective immediately." The woman on the line asked if everything was okay. I said, "It will be." That's 40% action right there, folks. Clean, deliberate steps. Second call, my attorney. Yes, I had one on retainer for business matters. I left a voicemail. "We need to talk first thing Monday morning about separating assets." No emotion in my voice. Just clarity. Then I started the car. As I drove home, my phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then repeatedly. "Jennifer." I let it ring. A text came through. "Where did you go?" Another. "This isn't funny." Another. "Mickle, answer me." Funny. I almost laughed at that one. Now here's the emotional part, because I'm not going to pretend I was some ice-cold machine. I felt it. The loss. The memories. The version of her I married. The vacations. The quiet nights. The shared dreams. But here's the truth. I wasn't grieving the woman at that dinner table. I was grieving the woman I thought she was. There's a difference. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Porch light on. Curtains drawn. Nothing visually broken. But I knew something fundamental had shifted. I went inside and packed one suitcase. Just essentials. Clothes. Laptop. Important documents from the safe. Passport. I didn't destroy anything. Didn't flip furniture. Didn't leave a note. Instead, I logged into our shared financial dashboard one last time. I moved my direct deposit to a new account. Scheduled automatic mortgage payments from my individual account. I wasn't going to let my credit burn because of emotion. Then I disabled her access to the investment portfolio. Not out of spite. Out of boundary. You see, revenge isn't always about humiliation. Sometimes it's about protection. about drawing a line so clear that nobody can pretend they didn't see it. And I'll admit something else. Part of me wanted her to feel it. Not pain like I felt, but instability. The sudden understanding that the foundation she assumed would always hold was gone. I booked a room at a hotel across town. Long-term suite. Quiet place. Before I left the house, I stood in the living room one last time. The couch where we'd watched movies. The dining table where we'd hosted friends. The framed wedding photo on the wall. I didn't smash it. I turned it face down. And that was enough. As I drove away, my phone buzzed again. Mickle, why are the cards declining? I didn't respond. Because here's where I made my choice. Now I want to know, do you believe in revenge? Or do you believe in walking away? What's the right move when someone destroys your trust? Comment below. I want to hear both sides. Because what I did next wasn't loud, but it was decisive. Jennifer thought I had stepped out for air. She had no idea I had stepped out of the marriage, and she was about to walk into an empty house with no access to the life she assumed would always be waiting for her. My phone didn't stop vibrating the entire drive to the hotel. Call after call, text after text. First confusion, then irritation, then panic. By the time I checked in and reached my suite, the messages had shifted tone. Why is my card declining? Did you freeze the accounts? Mickle, this isn't funny anymore. Where are you? I placed the phone on the dresser and let it light up the room like a strobe. I didn't answer. Not yet. Around midnight, she called again. I let it ring twice this time before picking up. Her voice wasn't composed anymore. What is going on? She demanded. I just got home. The house is empty. Your stuff is gone. My car got declined at the gas station. What did you do? I kept my voice steady. Measured. I paid for dinner, I said. That's what I did. This isn't the time for sarcasm, Mickle. I'm not being sarcastic. Silence on the line. Then softer, but sharper. You embarrassed me. Embarrassed. Not sorry. Not ashamed. Embarrassed. That word told me everything. You brought another man to our anniversary dinner, I said calmly. You whispered with him in the hallway. You touched him. You told him I'd handle the bill. She tried to interrupt. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't let her speak over me either. I saw you, Jennifer. Silence again. Heavy. Real. Then came the classic pivot. It's not what you think. I almost smiled. It always is. And what exactly do you think I think? I asked. She stumbled. We've just been close at work. It's complicated. No, I said. It's actually very simple. My words were short now. Clean. Sharp. I'm not funding your transition into someone else's life. And this is the moment everything changed. Tell me, are you rooting for me right now? Or do you think I went too far? Be honest in the comments. Uncle Mickle can take it. She shifted tactics. You froze everything. I can't even buy groceries. You can call David. I replied evenly. That landed. Her breathing changed. Faster. Angrier. You're being cruel. No, I said. Cruel is planning an affair and bringing him to a celebration you didn't even respect. I wasn't yelling. That's important. Anger is loud. Authority is quiet. I spoke to an attorney. I continued. We'll sort this out properly. Fairly. But as of tonight, I'm done pretending I don't see what's in front of me. She finally dropped the defensive tone. What are you doing? She whispered. Are you really leaving over this? Over this. Like it was a spilled drink. Not over this. I corrected. Over months of it. She tried one more angle. We can talk about this tomorrow. Just come home. I already am home, I said, looking around the hotel suite. Just not the one you expected. And then I ended the call. No dramatic goodbye. No insults. Click. I blocked her number. Not forever, but for that night. Because closure isn't always a long speech. Sometimes it's a boundary enforced. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle. No yelling echoing in my ears. No chaos. Just clarity. The next morning, I sent one email. Calm. Structured. Listing next steps. Mediation. Asset division. Temporary separation terms. Professional. Precise. And by noon, mutual friends had started calling. Apparently, she had told them I stormed out and overreacted. I didn't defend myself. Truth doesn't chase rumors. It waits. By the end of the day, David's social media had gone private. Interesting timing. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Aligned with my own self-respect. And that, folks, is a different kind of satisfaction. Not revenge. Not rage. Just consequence. Jennifer thought I would argue, cry, beg, compete. Instead, I withdrew access. To my money. To my home. To me. And sometimes the most devastating move isn't exposing someone publicly. It's letting them sit alone in the reality they created. The first week alone felt strange. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just quiet. I stayed in that hotel suite for 3 weeks before signing a short-term lease on a furnished condo across town. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom. Neutral walls. Minimal furniture. It felt temporary. And that's exactly what I needed. Temporary space to rebuild permanent clarity. Jennifer tried reaching out through email after I blocked her number. Some messages were angry. Some were defensive. A few attempted vulnerability. I made a mistake. We can fix this. You're throwing away 15 years. But here's the truth. I didn't throw it away. She did. I simply refused to keep holding something that was already broken. The legal process started moving. Papers filed. Accounts separated. Mediation scheduled. It was clinical. Businesslike. Cold in a way that matched my internal temperature. Friends eventually learned the full story. A couple of them admitted they'd noticed how distant she'd become. One quietly told me he'd seen her and David at a wine bar 2 months earlier, looking like more than co-workers. That one stung. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed how long I'd been the only one not wanting to see it. At mediation, Jennifer looked smaller somehow. Less certain. David wasn't there, of course. Funny how boldness fades when accountability shows up. She avoided eye contact for most of it. When she finally did speak directly to me, her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was unsettled. I didn't think you'd actually leave. There it was. The assumption that I'd complain, maybe separate briefly, but ultimately return. Because I always handled things. Because I always stayed. And maybe that's the lesson here. When you teach someone you'll tolerate slow disrespect, they begin to believe you always will. Looking back now, I wonder if I'd do it all the same way again. What about you? If you could go back and handle your worst betrayal differently, would you? Or was the pain necessary to become who you are now? Let me know below. The divorce finalized 6 months later. No screaming courtroom scenes. No dramatic last-minute confessions. Just signatures on paper and 2 people walking in opposite directions. I kept the condo and eventually bought it. Downsized my life. Simplified everything. Sold the old house. Split the equity fairly. I didn't try to financially ruin her. I wasn't interested in destruction. I was interested in freedom. And here's something that might surprise you. I didn't hate her. For a while I was hurt, disappointed, deeply betrayed. But hate is heavy. And I had already carried enough weight. I focused on rebuilding routines, morning workouts, cooking for myself, reconnecting with old friends I'd drifted from while trying to be the stable center of a marriage that was quietly unraveling. Therapy helped too. I'm not ashamed to say that. Talking to someone neutral forced me to examine my own patterns, my tendency to ignore red flags in the name of stability, my habit of proving love through responsibility instead of communication. There were nights I missed the old life. Not her exactly, but the familiarity, the shared history, the comfort of knowing someone would be in the other room. But peace slowly replaced that ache. And peace is underrated. A year later, I ran into Jennifer at a grocery store. Brief eye contact. Polite nod. She looked different. Not worse. Just changed. Maybe she'd learned something too. Maybe not. David wasn't with her. We didn't speak. Some stories don't need a final conversation. They just end. And I realized something standing in that frozen foods aisle. I wasn't angry anymore. I was grateful. Grateful I saw the truth when I did. Grateful I chose myself instead of competing for someone who had already stepped outside the vows. Because losing a marriage hurts. But losing yourself, trying to save it, hurts more. And I had managed to walk away with the one thing that mattered most. Myself. So here we are. A private anniversary dinner. A $3,000 bill. A backdoor exit into cold March air. And a man who decided silence would speak louder than rage. When I look back on that night now, I don't replay the image of her hand on his chest anymore. I don't hear the word embarrassed echoing in my head. What stays with me isn't the betrayal. It's the decision. The moment I realized I had two options. Compete for someone who had already stepped out, or step aside and let them feel the absence of what they took for granted. Folks, I'm not here to tell you my way is the only way. Some people fight for their marriage. Some forgive. Some rebuild something stronger. And I respect that. Every situation carries its own layers, its own history, its own complications. But here's what I've learned the hard way. Love without respect is just dependency. Commitment without honesty is just performance. And loyalty that only flows one direction isn't loyalty at all. I don't regret paying that bill. People ask me sometimes, why didn't you expose her? Why didn't you make a scene? Why not embarrass them right there at the table? Because dignity is quiet, and when you stay composed while someone underestimates you, that memory follows them longer than shouting ever could. I walked away without breaking a glass, without insulting a soul. And yet the message was clear. You don't get to disrespect me and still benefit from me. Now let me ask you something, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Is it better to forgive quietly and move on, or to make sure they fully understand exactly what they lost? There's no wrong answer. Drop it in the comments. I read them. I think about them. And I know there are people listening right now who are standing at their own version of that back door, wondering whether to walk through it. Here's my advice, from one grown man to another, or to any woman listening who's lived this too. Don't react from ego. React from self-respect. There's a difference. Ego wants to win. Self-respect wants peace. When I froze those accounts and packed that suitcase, I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was protecting myself. And protection isn't cruelty. It's maturity. The hardest part wasn't leaving the restaurant. It wasn't signing divorce papers. It wasn't sleeping alone in a new place. The hardest part was admitting that the version of her I loved no longer existed. Once I accepted that, everything became simpler. Painful, yes, but clear. And clarity is powerful. Today, my life is smaller in some ways. Quieter. More intentional. I don't chase noise. I don't ignore red flags. I don't confuse stability with silence anymore. If someone chooses me now, they choose me fully. And if they don't, I don't compete. I release. Because the one thing betrayal taught me is this. You can survive heartbreak. You can rebuild after humiliation. But you must never negotiate your own worth to keep someone who's already decided to leave in spirit. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Uncle Mickle's voice travels. And remember this one thing. When someone shows you they can live without your loyalty, show them you can live without their presence.